You want to stand here? Okay, I got you.
All right, there we go. Okay.
Okay, everybody, welcome to Troika Gallery, and thank you so much for coming in the opening of The Stillness of Time, which are the new evocative paintings by Kevin Fitzgerald. Both Laura and Jennifer, who own the gallery, are very sorry that they cannot be here. Jennifer is in the midst of unveiling a portrait of the Johns Hopkins, Kennedy Krieger, of the CEO, and it's happening right at this very moment. Wow. And she said, can you believe the unveiling is at the exact moment of Kevin's show? So Jennifer is also out of town. She has many family obligations and she couldn't make it. So tonight is the Fitzgeralds hosting the Fitzgerald. We have Wendy Fitzgerald, Kevin's lovely wife. I am Peg Fitzgerald, the gallery manager. My husband, Matthew Fitzgerald, my daughter, Bernadette Fitzgerald, and bartender son, Garrett Fitzgerald. And no, we are not related.
We have a big family. Thanks, thanks, sis.
Way back in the old country, we were all connected at some point. So with that said, I just want to say, wow, Kevin Fitzgerald in person. And he's quite the legend. He's been a painter for over 30 years. He was a student at the Corcoran School of Art in D.C. and the Maryland Institute College of Art, and studied extensively with Rao Middleman, another legendary painter. He has an MFA from George Washington University, and he has traveled the lands observing the lights and the moods of these beautiful scenes. His landscapes are collected by Oprah Winfrey, Barack Obama, Kelsey Grammer, the actor, journalist P.J. O'Rourke, and now you, you have the opportunity to be a collector. Kevin Fitzgerald, and without further ado, please give a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you very much for being here. I think the introduction might be longer than the talk. It was going to be at first a Q&A and then a talk, and then I heard later a speech, and I started getting more worried to walk around the block. But anyway, I have a few vignettes I'd like to share just briefly that might inform a bit about the work and what I've been trying to do most of my life. But the idea of the name of the show, The Stillness of Time, is sort of a funny play on words. You know, stillness. You know, we're still here. I'm still. What's, you know, be still. So it's a word. The words are funny. Words don't get you everywhere you need to go. And imagery and inanimate objects sometimes do take you places that words can't. You know, words are. It's a symbol language that tries to describe emotion in us, and it does. It's the only thing we have to work with, but it's the best thing we have to work with for a common denominator. But the visual and the music, sounds of music, these kinds of things are older than say words exactly. So the stillness of time, time itself is a question mark. I think of Augustine, first or second century to third century Roman in Hippo in North Africa, a Roman province. But this is the height of the empire. And Augustine was a great pivotal figure, and he said many funny things, as well as all the religious foundations he laid. They said, like, time. I know what time is until you ask me to put it into words. And he talked about the past and the present being always here, the present, the future never here. The past was, but it's the present is like an eternity. So time for Augustine was something, for the first time in intellectual history, someone thought about time as something outside of just using it as a part of the language. Like, well, what time is it? Or I'm going to be here next time, or the seasons, like in Ecclesiastes, a time for this, a time for that. But this is the first person that brought it out and thought, what is the nature of time itself? And we still don't quite know, do we? So we're working on that. So the inanimate objects, sometimes they exist like we exist, and we're temporal people. We're passing through. But it informed me. When I was a kid, I went to the National Gallery of Art, and I saw people smiling at paintings and looking at things, and realized that moment that those people are just passing by. But that Rembrandt painting has been talking to people for 500 years or 400 years. And that's so that that inanimate object is existing. It shares existence with us, the animate, but that it somehow may be on a different plane of experience. And it certainly slowed time. It slowed time down. People stop and look. So I thought maybe I would try to, get that in my work if I was going to be a painter. I was thinking about that at the time. So I brought a pet rock with me. This is when I was a kid. I found this rock, and I think you can probably see a face in it. And it provoked me, to think. I don't know why, but I knew it was a very old rock, millions of years probably. There's a shell fossil in there, which is the eye, and I just never can get over it. So it's like an inanimate object, but whenever I look at this, I smile or I think, wow, time just goes away, whatever time is, and I'm back to that point when I picked it up off the ground somewhere. So that teases me out of all thought, as doth eternity, which John Keats said. Now, John Keats, this was another vignette, he happened to be in England about 200 years ago and was helping to give birth to the Romantic movement, which is the idea that we don't know everything anymore. We're not so certain. And the joke is, I'm usually right, but I'm always certain. We hear that in politics. People are certain about their certainty, but they're not necessarily always right. But anyway, Keats was lucky enough that he knew this group of people, Wordsworth and Shelley and Byron, and Lord Elgin. Now, I was an art history teacher. I used to always say Elgin, the Elgin marbles. I always mispronounced it. And about a year ago, I looked it up, and it's Elgin. So anyway, the Elgin marbles were saved by Lord Elgin in the 1700s. There was Turkey and Greece were beating each other to death for whatever apparent reason, who knows. But the Parthenon was still in perfect repair at the time. It had survived for 2,000 years because it was so perfectly beautiful. And these stone sculptures, and people will go and say, oh my God, look at that. Look at these marbles, these people, these giant gods and goddesses. And they were perfectly wrought and beautifully wrought by Phidias and Praxiteles and these guys. And they were a compass point for humanity. But the Greeks and the Turks were having a war, and they were blowing up. They stored powder in the Parthenon, and many of you know the history, and a mortar shot hit it and blew the roof off it and tore it all to pieces. But it exists as a ruin, but the frieze was still there. These figures were up in there. So Lord Elgin, now he's a criminal, because he went and culturally appropriated these marbles, but really he saved them. Excuse me. And he brought them back to England. And one of his buddies is John Keats, this great poet. And this funny little side story I recently came across is that he stored the marbles in a little greenhouse on his estate and let Keats come in there. And so John Keats would go in to this greenhouse filled with all this Greek statuary that no one had ever seen, and was by himself. So he stood still before it. At the time, Keats was just having a moment. I can only imagine what came of that. And of course, Keats was to die at 26 years old, but he was one of these incandescent geniuses of poetry. And he wrote the Ode on the Grecian Urn and talked about his experience. Really, he was talking about that. He said there's a little vase here, and he saw little pictures of Greeks doing certain things. There's a little empty city, and there's somebody about to kiss somebody, and he looked at that, but he was talking about the Elgin marbles. And because it moved him so much to be in the presence of these stones, basically, which were never going to change. He realized that. And he knew he was. So anyway, he, lines in that poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, it's the idea that, the idea again, first time that the inanimate object exists with us on an equal ground at least, maybe superior, because we're just passing through. We don't know what's going to happen. But so time, Time writes no wrinkles on thine azure brow, since as dawn's creation beheld thee, thou rollest now. Now that's a romantic poet, Byron, talking about the ocean. Time writes no wrinkles on thine azure brow, the blueness of the ocean. Since as dawn's creation beheld thee, thou rollest now. It's always going to be, it's like the respiration of the planet. And then Keats wrote, after spending days in contemplation with these marbles, he wrote, what did he write? Bold lover looking for your kiss. There's this picture of this guy reaching for the kiss of the fair maiden, and he can't quite reach it because it's trapped in an image. And so it's never going to happen. He's never going to get it. And they're never going to find their love. But he says, fear not, forever wilt thou love, and she be fair. So it just kills you, the way that he could see, the permanence of that, even though it didn't actually happen. It was at the moment of potentiality, So in paintings, I'm trying to keep those kinds of things in mind. I try to think of something that would be an interlocking inevitability of color, that somehow shapes that seem like they have to be that way, and the color has to be that way, and it remind us emotionally of states that we have that come to us in dreams. So I'm not trying to make anything that's too particular. As they say, as you gain the particular, you lose the infinite. So that's why poetry is so cool, because you can read a book and there's all this crap in a book, all this da-da-da-da-da-da, and she did this, she did that. But in a poem, you've got to really use the language and just pare everything away. And just this essence comes through. So at the end of Keats' poem is, one old age this generation shall waste. Thou shalt remain in midst of other woe, a friend to man, who shall proclaim beauty, truth is beauty. That's all you know on earth and all you need to know. So this is coming from a 26-year-old genius, and he quickly died after that. But that's the kind of movement that happened because he was made to stand still. So time, to me, I've discovered later in life, is that if I don't do anything all day long, time goes by so nice and slow. When I start moving through space and start doing things, time just goes away. It just goes away. So to be still before something, it says that in the Bible, be still and know that I'm the Lord. But to be still by the still waters. Stillness is an important visual concept for us to entertain, to keep us healthier, I think, rather than to be so turbulent, So I could go different directions with it, but when I was 10 years old, about the time I found this rock, I built a stone wall in the woods with some friends of mine in the woods in D.C., which is a beautiful park, Fort DuPont Park, Fort Davis Park, and it's exactly the same as it was. This is 55 years ago. But the park is not going to be touched because it's just, it's preserved. It was an old Civil War fort, but it's maybe 2 square miles of real estate right in southeast Washington. And I went in there and with some friends, with one friend in particular, Donald Freeman, and we built a stone wall about 20 or 30 feet long, worked really hard on it for 2 or 3 days. I don't know why. We were building a defense or something. They were going to get us, and we were going to play guns or whatever. And I built this stone wall, and and then we left and we moved. But I've forgotten about it. But every once in a while, I remember, I built that wall back there. And my brother and I, about 2 years ago, went back to D.C. with bicycles on our cars and decided we would ride around the neighborhood like we were kids, and the neighborhood's the same. And we went out into the woods. And you could see places where 3 forts had been built, but there used to be like rusty nails and things. Everything's gone like that. That's all. Time has taken care of that. Life has. But the stone wall we came across, and it's right there, exactly. It just blew me away. I tell you, I was choked up. I mean, it was like my parents called me in to get a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something. And 55 years later, I came back out to the stone wall. And my brother and I were just freaking out. It was just really cool. But that time was still there at that place. And it's still there. And I don't think it'll be wrecked. But anyway, I'm trying to get those kinds of feelings to happen in a visual arrangement. And that's the idea about what I'm trying to do. So is there any questions. The pet rock will take them.
See if I can find a way to express it. How do you experience that feeling of what you're trying to capture as you're standing there working on a painting?
Well,
How
it's
does
a
that-
memory. It's a memory. I'm not really trying to do anything. It's blue collar. I just want to not think about it, and I've done it so long. It's just like I get a phone call or something, and I go across the studio and mix a color because I was working on some place, and I'm not even thinking about the painting or anything. I'm mixing, and I come back, and my hand and it's exactly the color I need. So I want to get into that mindlessness part. That my intentionality is always ruination. When you're trying to plan something, it's not a good idea. The cool stuff happens when you didn't expect it, and then you can be too self-referential. You can worry too much about what you're intending to do. You always trip and fall. You can't quite reach it. You have an idea in mind. If you try to write a story or try to put something down, you have this. Oh man, that's so cool! I'm going to write that down. And as soon as you start writing, what happens? It kind of disappears. It kind of evaporates. But that's what you have to keep. You keep writing. So I just keep nailing it as far as going into the shop. I just mess a lot of paintings up. I make a big mess, and then I start again. Start another painting. Start another painting. Start another painting, and just it's a process.
So I have a question.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go.
Me first?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
The colors, like you were just saying. Do you put the color on the painting and then see if it's going to work for you? Or do you mix it and see if it's going to work? Or do you do, I guess, maybe a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both, but I push it around and try that I can destroy my intentionality by shoving the paint around and making a mess, and then finding something that accidentally happens in the arena of the rectangle, and then something emerges that you couldn't plan for.
Yeah.
So I'm tricking myself into a happy accident, let's say.
And do you ever paint over, like you think, oh, that color's not working, so you paint over it with a different
All
color?
the time.
Okay.
And the paintings that come out of this gallery that come back to me, I will look at them and say, well, what happened? And it's like a dialogue, and I'll start around the studio, and one day it'll tell me, well, you need more blue over here. So there's a dialogue that goes on. And when paintings sell, it's a joke. But George Ennis, the painter, said that you never really own the painting. Whoever bought the painting. If I decide something needs to be changed, I'm coming to your house and I'm going to make the change. And that was in the 1880s. He came up with that one, so that was good.
Is it all oil, or do you use acrylic?
I use both, but it's all oil at the end. I start out with acrylic because it's quicker, and I get started with that, and then go to oil.
That was my question, is
Yes.
whether you had decided for oil because of the quick drying of acrylic.
Yeah. There's a lot of tricks in there. The oil is you can't quite get acrylic to do what oil does, which gives you that. There's several layers, and they're of course on the atomic level, I guess, but much thinner than a sheet of paper. But a layer of varnish, and then more color, and then more varnish, and then light's coming down through that surface, going through those varnished layers, bouncing back up at a different, and as you're moving around, your eye's receiving it in a different space each time, so it gives it a liveliness that simply a flat color can't do. So it's a multiplicity.
So you varnish and then paint, and then varnish and then paint?
Well, these are trade secrets now. We're getting there. The secrets of art are learned in secret, but yeah, that's just the thing. That's just glazing. You glaze, and you don't like it, and you cover it up, and you wait, and then you go hit it again, and then there's a buildup of richness of surface. That's the way that goes.
Kevin, one of my favorite paintings, of yours, obviously. The way you work with colors and your landscapes and everything is just incredible. But it's amazing to me how you've captured, even working just with light and minimal colors, and I'm sure you remember what I'm talking about, but the nocturnal
Yep.
seashore with the waves. You can barely see it. It's a dark painting, you can barely see it. And it's just, when you sit there in a room and it's, dimly lit and you can, you just watch this painting, it's amazing how, and I don't know how you do it, and I don't want to know, I know it's just, even with minimal light, it comes alive. And you're talking about time, and I think it's really neat. I never thought of it this way, but I can remember as a child, one of my favorite things was to get away from the boardwalk when we were there with my family and walk out toward the ocean.
Yeah, yeah.
And you got away from the sound and all the craziness, and you just heard the waves and this just deep darkness at night, and I can remember taking my children by the hand, when they were, years and years later, walking with Michelle hand in hand, close by the
Sure.
water. And then right now even, it's one of my favorite things to do, and you captured it perfectly. And
No, thank you.
it's
That's,
just a very simple painting, but just, very complex.
it's just thank you,
Timeless
yeah.
to me.
Well, it's trying to be not so much putting a harsh light on things, but that there's a suggestion, and again, the general is, according to Plato, the general is better than the specific. As we gain the particular, we lose the infinite, so that if it's darkened or twilight, it's something I've done a lot of in the past. I'm trying to be a little brighter now, but I'll always go back to that because it's called entelechy, the Greek word meaning about to be, about to come. So that's much more exciting if you're at that moment of potentiality. Like when you're packing for a vacation, it's so great. You're really loading the car up and getting ready to go somewhere, and then it's how great. That's entelechy. That's the potentiality is better than actuality.
All right.
I'm sorry to say.
Kevin, I enjoyed your discourse on time and what it means or what it doesn't mean. I think it means less than we think it does, which I believe is what you're trying to get at. And this reminds me of a very famous painter who was commissioned by a very rich merchant in Milan to do a portrait of his new wife, Lisa Gioconda. Now, you know where I'm going
Yeah.
with this. And so he started doing the painting, and he never quite had it right. And he kept working on it, 35 layers presumably of oil paint, some so thin they were almost not there even after he painted them.
And he had that painting when he.
And he kept the painting. You talk about you never own a painting. So he kept
Right.
the painting with him for 13 years, traveled with it from city to city in Italy and France, and never gave it to the owner. And it was with him in the studio when he died. Of course, you know which painting it is. And so
That's
what
great.
happens
Yeah,
when
it gives me
somebody
good chills.
doesn't think
Yeah.
about the material, but thinks about the mystical, how I can make this time stand still, which of course it today does in the Louvre.
Right. He was one of those guys like Augustine. To have an original thought is a very difficult thing. Originality is the rarest thing. So that he's one of his one of his original thoughts was, of all the things in the world, nothing is the most interesting to him. That there's this and this, but what about the space in between? And he intuited the idea that there's something else going on that's holding all these things in space. And now we're still trying to figure out what dark matter is and all this, that it's 2/3 or 3/4 of the universe is something that it's totally incomprehensible to us. But to have that leap, that's the hope of the human mind and the experience, the human experience, which once in a while along the path of history, there's these stars like Augustine, Leonardo, and then they point the pathway, So that's and time is just it's a construct. I think it's a construct. I mean, of course we're all aging, but it's just so what? That's not time, That's just an organism getting older. It's not this. There might not be any time. And according to Augustine, there might not be. I recommend you to read. He suspects that it's not. At the present,
Sort of Hawking and Einstein at the time may just be so relative it doesn't exist in nature. There is no time. We make time.
Well, I'm trying to slow time here, that's for sure, with a painting with artwork. At least do that. But any other questions? Thank you for that.
I'm curious if you have particular artists that you admire.
Just so many. But a touchstone for me, I was trying to struggle to be a painter, and I was trying to be like Monet. I was doing plein air paintings all the time, just over and over and over again, and nothing was happening. And then I was in graduate school, and I was just, what the heck am I going to do? It took me 4 years to get the 2-year degree. I just was dropping out and getting back in. Do I want to be a painter? Do I want to do this? And then I came across in D.C. Albert Pinkham Ryder, and he's another one of these compass point people who realized something all alone in a tenement in New York. And he only has probably 30 or 40 known paintings, but he does very much what I do. I kind of steal from him my darker paintings, because he was getting this interlocking shapes of things that kind of relate to the real world, but they're like puzzle pieces that are metaphysical or that make us suggest to us that something else is going on that we don't know about. And that's what art does. Art awakens you. We're all walking along, G.K. Chesterton said, under a state of collective amnesia. We're all walking around amnesiacs. We don't know really how we got here, where we're going. We can believe about it, but we don't really know. So it's fine, we'll just go ahead and go to work and have a nice dinner or whatever. But because that's the amnesia. But when you come across a piece of art or a powerful piece of music or a great play, it can just bust you right down. Because it reminds you at that moment when you're in contact with that art that at least you've forgotten something. It reminds you that you forget. So that's the touch. And Albert Pinkham Ryder did that, and the Europeans recognized it first, of course, like Poe and like Melville. They were great in Europe. America didn't care about Poe or Melville. Poe a little bit, but Melville completely. And Melville's the great American writer in the 19th century. I've read Moby Dick a couple of times, and 30 years after I read it the first time, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe this, And you turn the page, it took me like 20 minutes to read one page, This consciousness level. But right with that is Albert Pinkham Ryder, who jumped into the subconscious mind at the time of Freud and all that, and made these paintings that were just about paint marks. And it's like a Rorschach test. So that's what, so Albert Pinkham Ryder is the short answer for that. And everybody that ever tried. I love every artist under the age of 7. They're just the most fantastic art you ever, go into any elementary school, if you can get through security, and just see this unbelievable stuff, that the mind or the heart creates before you become ego-driven, before you say, oh my God, what are they looking at me, But it's so wonderful to see that stuff. I love that children's art. This painting is Inlet Dawn, and I'm trying to put across the idea of hope or possibility. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Show the feeling of it's been very dark, but then there's these really nice colors that present themselves at some point in dawn or the evening. So I'm interested in that time of the day because it's like maximizes possibilities. Something's about to happen. The beginning of the day or the end of the day. Okay. In this painting, I'm trying to show like the heat and the glare of an ocean day, sort of an evanescence or sort of an atmosphere starting to just emerge, like a cloud just emerges and catches the light in the scene, like a lampshade does. It somehow does that. It reflects back up and down, and there's this sort of special effect that the natural world presents itself to us. And you forget once again that it might be an ocean or anything. It's just that there's these various visual phenomena happening and taking place. And that's what I'm trying to get across there. This is Mount Vernon Fields, this painting. And it reminds me, I grew up in Alexandria in D.C. area, and Mount Vernon's a beautiful place to visit, but along the way down the Mount Vernon Parkway, you get these glimpses of the Potomac River. And it's completely separate from any of the historical aspects, but it's just simply a beautiful landscape. And there's these flat lands that you can see the river poking, peeking through, and I just think it's, sort of very, it's a very, what's the word, provocative sort of visual arrangement that makes you think of something much longer than the here and now. You see this ancient, it's like an ancient river, and it's been there. The East Coast rivers are very old, like the Appalachian Mountains and the Blue Ridge Mountains. They're some of the oldest features on Earth, and I think that it's really cool to see that right here where so much history happened. So I've returned to this theme many times, and Mount Vernon is a resonant thing. We all know what Mount Vernon is, but just to see it as the landscape and forget about the history. Just the landscape is what the eternal aspect would be, rather than the fact that a country was founded here, which is also very nice. But this is also a painting that is on one of the invitation pieces or used for advertising, and it's an image that I'm particularly drawn to. It reminds me of an old Western show. I was actually watching Shane on television and saw the scene when he rides into town for the showdown, and this was reminiscent of that to me. So, and then there's a suggestion of a path going into a deep space. So I like the evocation of that, of the possibility once again, but there's something portentous, not pretentious, but portentous, hopefully, about to happen. This painting's a little different, Maple Pond. I'm trying to get across an idea here of solitude and repose, like by still waters. Like still waters are a place where you can, be still and know that the Lord is here or something. I'm trying to just have that sort of elemental, primal sense of beginning, like a spring kind of a thing. But it's a series I'm working on right now, which is just simply an isolated tree blasting out its color at you, and not thinking that it's a tree, but just that it's giving up a color for you to enjoy.
Yes. That's great.
I think
That's
Prospect.
really nice.
It's a big park. And
Yeah.
Did you tell me the name of this?
This is Maple
It might
Pond.
not be Prospect Park.
I can do this. This painting is called Evening Dream, and I'm trying again on this particular painting to get an idea of a memory of a road, the poetic idea of a road less traveled, or an old road, an old path that may be like an old pathway in one's life, something that was from long ago. So it's sort of a memory, but I want the path to lead to a certain destination that would be pleasing for the viewer. Interlocking shapes, that seem to be inevitable. As again, okay, this painting, Horizon Dawn, is again trying to illustrate or trying to bring forth the idea of something's about to happen, and whether it's a dawn or an evening, not so sure, but I did call it dawn. It's hopeful, red sky at dawn, that kind of thing. But I just want the idea of almost forgetting the fact that it's a landscape, but just that these are color marks, and these are things that resonate in the viewer, rather than they being any particular place. This painting is Iron Shower Evening. I'm just trying to get an idea of deep space and an inviting space, where that if you were sitting here, you may want to go way back into this distance and see what's in that distant field. Also, I'm trying to get a feeling that the viewer is elevated or floating themselves, so that you're not really grounded, you're not really standing there. You might be 20 feet off the ground, sort of in a memory. So I'm trying to get the idea of it being, not necessarily rooted in the here and now, but that there's a possibility of something else that might hint at something beyond.
What's the name of it?
Invitation pieces for the show, and it's a new series I'm trying to work on where you're thinking about iconic memories, maybe like a walk in the woods towards the water in the distance.